The envelope didn't look like anything special. Matte paper, no logo, no signature, just her name, printed, not handwritten, as if even recognition had been standardized. "Keep it discreet," HR had said, lowering her voice just enough to make the air heavier. Discreet. That word lingered longer than it should have. She stepped into the corridor, the kind that always felt slightly too quiet for a building this full. The lights hummed faintly above her, like something mechanical trying not to be noticed. Her fingers didn't rush. They rarely did. But something in the weight of that envelope suggested it wasn't just money. She opened it, paused, read the number once, then again. Not because it was large, but because it was wrong, not random, not mistaken, structured, calculated, carefully placed in a pattern that shouldn't exist if everything was fair. She didn't react immediately, didn't call anyone, didn't turn around. Because sometimes the first reaction isn't shock, it's recognition. And recognition is quieter. Much quieter than anyone in that building was prepared for. She didn't go back to her desk right away. Not because she was overwhelmed. Because she was thinking. The kind of thinking that doesn't rush to conclusions, but starts quietly rearranging everything it thought it understood. The corridor stretched ahead of her, long and neutral, like it had no interest in what just happened. People moved past. Conversations overlapped. Laptops clicked open and shut. Everything looked normal, which made it worse. Because the number in that envelope didn't belong to normal. It belonged to a pattern. She sat down 10 minutes later, placed the envelope next to her keyboard, and didn't touch it again. Instead, she opened a file. Compensation structure. Internal. Not because she wasn't supposed to, but because no one expected her to. There's a difference. A small one. But in systems like this, it's everything. At first, it looked clean. Ranges, levels, bands. Numbers aligned like they were designed to be trusted. And for most people, they were. But she wasn't most people. She didn't read vertically, she read across, between teams, between dates, between decisions that had been signed off without ever being truly examined. And that's when it shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough. A slight deviation here, a quiet inconsistency there, nothing that would trigger an alarm, but enough to suggest something far more expensive than a mistake. She leaned back slightly, eyes still on the screen. Didn't blink, didn't react, because this wasn't about her bonus anymore. That would have been simpler, contained, forgettable. This wasn't. Because if her number didn't fit, then others didn't either. And if others didn't fit, then the structure wasn't holding. A message popped up. HR. Hope everything is clear. Let me know if you have any questions. She looked at it, read it once, then minimized it without replying. Not out of hesitation, out of precision. Because questions, in moments like this, don't clarify things. They alert them. She opened another file. Historical adjustments. This one wasn't meant to be compared side by side, which made it the perfect candidate. Dates, names, amounts. And then, alignment. Not perfect, but deliberate. A curve that bent in one direction, too consistently to be accidental. She exhaled slowly, not because she was surprised, because she wasn't anymore. And that, somehow, was worse, because surprise is temporary, but understanding settles in. Across the office, someone laughed. A meeting started. A notification chimed. The system kept moving, exactly as it was designed to. And that design was now visible. She didn't print anything, didn't save copies, didn't flag anomalies. Not yet. Because the moment you formalize something like this, you stop observing it. You become part of it. And she wasn't ready for that. Not before she understood the full shape. Her cursor hovered over the last column. A small field, easy to ignore. Adjustment rationale. Most entries were generic. Market alignment, performance calibration, retention incentive, Language designed to close questions, not open them. But a few were different, shorter, cleaner, almost coded. She clicked one, then another, then a third, and suddenly, the pattern wasn't subtle anymore. She sat still, hands resting lightly on the keyboard, eyes steady. Because this wasn't just uneven, it was structured inequality, with documentation, and that changes everything. She glanced at the envelope again, still exactly where she left it, still quiet, still discreet. And for the first time since opening it, she smiled. Not out of relief, not out of satisfaction, but because now, she knew what she was looking at. And more importantly, she knew what it could become. Because in systems like this, the real risk isn't what's hidden, it's what someone finally understands well enough to prove. And she was getting very close, very, very close. She didn't rush. That was the first decision, not written, not spoken, but absolute. Because speed, in situations like this, doesn't create advantage. It creates noise. And noise gets noticed. By mid-afternoon, the office had shifted into that familiar rhythm. Half focus, half fatigue. Conversations softened. Keyboards slowed. The energy dipped just enough for patterns to hide in plain sight. Perfect. She opened a new workspace. Blank, clean, unconnected to anything official. No shared drives, no tracked changes, no audit trails, just structure. She didn't copy data, she rebuilt it, carefully, field by field, name by name, amount by amount, because reconstruction forces attention, and attention reveals intent. At first, it looked identical, which was expected. Then she added time, not as dates, as sequences, and that's when the structure started to move. Adjustments weren't random, they clustered. Not by performance cycles, not by market shifts, by proximity, to decisions, to leadership changes, to moments. She paused, not because she needed a break, because she recognized the architecture. This wasn't compensation, it was signaling. Certain people were being aligned upward, quietly, consistently, without documentation that would raise questions, and others were being stabilized, held within range, regardless of contribution. She leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowing slightly, because now the pattern had direction, and direction implies control. Another message. HR again. Just checking in. She didn't open it this time. Let it sit, unread. Because timing communicates more than words ever could. She added one more layer. Ratios. Relative positioning across similar roles. The kind of comparison no one officially runs. Because officially, everything is already aligned. And then it broke. Not the data, the illusion. The spread wasn't gradual, it jumped, in intervals. Almost like thresholds. Invisible lines where compensation suddenly shifted upward, for reasons that had nothing to do with role, tenure, or output. She traced one of those jumps backward, followed it, through approvals, through timestamps, through a chain that wasn't supposed to be visible from where she sat. And there it was. A name. Not highlighted, not emphasized, just repeated. In approvals, in overrides, in silent adjustments that never triggered review. She didn't say it out loud, didn't need to, because once you see repetition like that, you don't unsee it. Across the office, someone closed a deal. Applause broke out briefly, then faded. Normal life, normal business, normal metrics. But this wasn't normal. She scrolled further, deeper. And then she saw something that made her stop completely. Not lean back, not pause. Stop. A cluster of entries. Same day, same time window, multiple adjustments, across different teams. Different roles, different levels. All aligned, perfectly. Not upward, downward. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Still. Because this wasn't optimization, this wasn't correction, this was containment. And suddenly, the envelope made sense. Not as a reward, as calibration. She looked at the number again in her memory, placed it within the model she had just built, and it fit. Too well. Exactly where it needed to be, to keep her inside the line. A quiet breath left her, controlled, measured. Because now the question wasn't, is this fair? That question was already obsolete. The real question was, who benefits from this staying invisible? She closed the file. Not deleted. Not saved to a system anyone could access. Just closed. Then she opened her email, scrolled, found the original message from HR, hovered over reply, and stopped. Because once you ask a question, you give the system a chance to prepare an answer. And she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, she opened a new document, different from the first. Not analysis, not reconstruction. Narrative. Because numbers explain patterns. But narratives, they move decisions. She started writing, slowly, precisely, without accusation, without emotion, just sequence, observation, implication. The kind of document that doesn't demand attention, but earns it. Somewhere between the third and fourth paragraph, she realized something. This wasn't just internal. This was exposure. And exposure, at this level, doesn't stay contained. Her screen reflected faintly in the window beside her. Office lights behind, city lights ahead. Two worlds. One visible. One about to be. She kept typing, because the moment had already shifted. And whatever this was, it was no longer a quiet discrepancy. It was a $40 million risk. And risks like that don't disappear, they escalate. Especially when someone finally knows where to look. And she did. She knew exactly where to look next. The only question left was, who would see it first? If you've ever been handed something that looked like a reward, but felt like a boundary, pause for a second. In your workplace, what gets labeled as recognition, but quietly keeps you exactly where you are? Because sometimes the system doesn't push you down. It just adjusts you enough. Enough to stay comfortable. Enough to stay silent. And the most dangerous part? It all looks fair. Until you start comparing. She didn't send it. Not yet. The document sat there, finished, precise, almost weightless in its tone. No accusations, no adjectives that could be challenged. Just sequence, structure, and consequence. The kind of writing that doesn't argue. It simply reveals. She closed her laptop. Not shut down. Not saved to the company cloud. Just closed. Because some things shouldn't exist in systems that are built to monitor themselves. Outside, the evening had already taken over. Glass reflected more than it revealed. The city blurred into soft lines of light, like everything was slightly out of focus. Except her. She walked slower than usual, not distracted, calibrating. Exposure isn't a single act, it's a chain, and the first link defines the rest. By the time she reached home, the document was no longer just a document. It was a decision, not about if, about how. She opened her laptop again. Different network, different environment, no corporate traces, no automatic sync, just control. She read it from the beginning, line by line, not as the author, as the reader who wasn't supposed to see it. The opening was neutral, safe, almost routine. Compensation alignment, internal consistency, observed variance, language that doesn't alarm, language that invites review. Then it shifted. Quietly, from observation to implication. Clusters, thresholds, directional adjustments, a pattern that didn't need to be named to be understood. And finally, impact. Not hypothetical, not theoretical, quantified. Contained within a single phrase that sat there, almost casually, $40 million risk. She didn't bold it, didn't highlight it, didn't frame it as a warning, because real risk doesn't need decoration. It carries itself. She leaned back slightly, eyes still on the screen. Because this was the point most people misunderstand. They think exposure is about being loud, direct, confrontational. It's not. It's about timing and audience. She opened another window. Investor relations, public disclosures, names, structures, connections that rarely appear in the same place at the same time. And there it was. A familiar pattern. Not in numbers this time, in responsibility. Certain names appeared in oversight, in approvals, in governance layers that were supposed to be independent. She didn't react, because by now, reaction had been replaced with something else. Clarity. This wasn't just internal misalignment, this was reputational exposure. And reputational exposure doesn't get handled quietly, it gets escalated. Her cursor hovered over a new email. No internal addresses, none. External. Not media, too early, too uncontrolled. Investor side. Because investors don't ask if something is fair, they ask if something is risky. And risk, when documented like this, moves fast. She started typing, not the full report, not the entire narrative. A summary, tight, controlled, structured to do one thing, trigger attention. No accusations, no conclusions, just enough clarity to create a question that couldn't be ignored. She attached nothing. Because once you attach, you commit. And she wasn't committing yet. She was positioning. Across the room, her phone lit up. A message, unknown number. She glanced at it. Didn't open it. Not immediately. Because timing, again. She finished the email, read it once, removed one sentence, shortened another. Precision over volume, always. Her finger hovered over send. And then, she looked back at the document. Because this was the last moment it remained private, contained. After that, it wouldn't belong to her anymore. The system would see it, respond to it, defend against it. Or escalate it. She exhaled, slow, controlled, and clicked. The email disappeared, quietly, without confirmation, without sound, just like everything else that had led to this moment. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she opened it. A single line, no greeting, no signature. We need to talk. She didn't reply. Because now, the system wasn't just being observed. It was reacting. And reactions are never random. She placed the phone down, looked at the window. The city hadn't changed. But something had. Because the moment information leaves containment, it stops being data. It becomes leverage. And someone, somewhere, had just realized that. The message didn't feel urgent. It felt precise. We need to talk. No name, no context, no attempt to persuade. Just a statement, placed exactly where it needed to be. She didn't respond. Not because she didn't understand, but because she did. Too well. There are moments when communication isn't about exchange, it's about positioning. And whoever sent that message wasn't asking. They were marking presence. She turned the phone face down, not dismissing it, containing it. Because the sequence had already started. And sequences, once initiated, don't reverse. They unfold. Morning arrived without announcement. The kind of quiet, pale light that makes everything feel temporarily neutral, as if the world hasn't decided what it is yet. She arrived early. Earlier than necessary. Earlier than expected. The office felt different. Not visibly, not structurally, but in the small delays. The half-second pauses before greetings. The way people looked, then looked away just slightly faster than usual. Information had moved, not fully. Not publicly, but enough. Her screen lit up. Inbox. 3 new emails. Subject lines carefully neutral. Follow-up. Clarification. Quick sync. Language designed to sound casual, while doing the opposite. She opened none of them. Because whoever writes first reveals their position. Instead, she opened her document. The original one. Read it again, not for errors, for weight. It hadn't changed, which meant the environment around it had. A meeting invite appeared. No description, no agenda, just time and a room. She checked the attendees. HR, finance, legal. A triangle. Not escalation, alignment. She accepted, without comment, because declining would create noise. And she wasn't here to create noise. She was here to observe response. The room was already occupied when she entered. Not full, just enough. Silence wasn't awkward. It was prepared. HR smiled first. Polite, measured. The kind of smile that arrives before words have been chosen. We just wanted to connect. Of course. She nodded, sat down, placed nothing on the table, not even her phone. Because presence, in moments like this, should be clean. Finance spoke next. Numbers, neutral language, frameworks. Words that sound stable, even when they're not. Legal didn't speak, not yet, just observed. Which told her everything she needed to know. They weren't here to deny. They were here to understand. What she understood. HR leaned slightly forward. Can you walk us through what you're seeing? A careful question. Not what you found, what you're seeing. She didn't answer immediately. Because silence, used correctly, is information. Then calmly. I'm seeing alignment. A pause. Subtle, but real. Finance shifted slightly. Alignment with what? She met his gaze. Steady, unhurried. Outcomes. No accusation, no conclusion, just a word. And it landed. Because in systems like this, outcomes are everything, and alignment implies intent. Legal finally spoke. Voice quiet, controlled. Are you suggesting there's a structural issue? She didn't blink. I'm suggesting it's consistent. Another pause. Longer this time. Because consistency is harder to explain than error. HR exhaled softly, recalibrating. We value transparency. Of course they do. She nodded. Then this helps. And for the first time, the room didn't feel prepared. Because transparency, when real, isn't comfortable. It removes options. Finance cleared his throat. We'd like to review your analysis. There it was. Not a request for explanation, a request for access. She tilted her head slightly. Not refusal, not agreement. Which version? The question was simple, but it did something important. It introduced multiplicity. Legal's eyes sharpened, just slightly. Is there more than one? She held the moment. Let it sit. Because now, they were asking questions. And questions shift control. Depends on the audience. Silence. Not empty. Dense. Because now the structure had changed. They weren't managing a situation anymore. They were entering one. HR's smile didn't return. Who else has seen this? There it was. The real question. Not what is it, but where is it? She didn't answer immediately. Because answers, once given, can't be adjusted. Instead, she stood up. Smoothly, without urgency. I think the better question is, who needs to? And with that, she stepped away from the table. No confrontation, no raised voices, no conclusions. Just movement. Because the moment had shifted. Again. And now, they weren't trying to understand the data. They were trying to contain it. Which meant one thing. It was already too late. She didn't go back to her desk. Not immediately. Because some moments don't belong to routine anymore. They belong to transition. The hallway felt longer now. Not physically, structurally. As if every step carried a different kind of weight. One that didn't come from pressure, but from clarity. Behind her, the room hadn't followed. No one called her back. No one tried to stop her, which was telling. Because when systems still believe they have control, they act. When they don't, they observe. She walked past the glass panels, past reflections that no longer looked neutral. Everything was the same, and yet nothing was. At her desk, her screen was already awake. Notifications stacked, messages waiting, signals. She ignored them, all of them, because reaction, at this stage, would only dilute what had already been set in motion. Instead, she opened one final document. Not the analysis, not the narrative. A note, short, precise. Not addressed to HR, not to finance, not even to legal. To herself. A record. Of sequence, of timing, of decisions made without noise. Because clarity, once achieved, needs structure, or it fades. She wrote slowly. No emotion, no commentary. Just facts. Envelope received. Variance identified. Pattern confirmed. Risk quantified. External signal initiated. Internal response observed. 6 lines. Enough. She read it once, then closed it. Not saved to any system that could reinterpret it. Just closed. Across the office, movement had changed. Subtly, but irreversibly. Meetings formed faster. Doors closed more often. Voices lowered just enough to be noticed. Not panic. Containment. She stood up, took nothing with her, left the envelope where it was. Because its purpose had already been fulfilled. Near the exit, she paused. Not to look back, but to register something most people miss. The system was still running, processes still active, decisions still being made. But the control had shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but structurally. Because control doesn't belong to the loudest voice or the highest title. It belongs to the point of leverage. And leverage had just changed hands. Outside, the air felt colder, cleaner, as if the world beyond the glass didn't carry the same weight of alignment and adjustment. Her phone buzzed once. No name. Just a notification. Meeting requested, investor review, urgent. She looked at it, didn't open it. Not yet. Because urgency, when it comes from the outside, means one thing. The signal landed. And once a signal like that lands, it doesn't return. It expands. She stepped forward, away from the building, away from the structure that had tried to define her position. And for the first time, there was no corridor, no system, no alignment. Just direction. Clear, unrestricted, and entirely hers. Because in the end, this was never about the bonus. It was about the moment someone realized they were never inside the system. They were the one holding it together. And the second they stopped, everything else had to respond. Silence doesn't always mean nothing happened. Sometimes, it means everything already did.